Welcome everyone to this joint event sponsored by the Wisconsin Book Festival, the UW-Madison Program in Creative Writing, and the University of Wisconsin Press. This reading wouldn't have been possible without the help of the Madison Public Library, the Madison Public Library Foundation, and all of the Wisconsin Book Festival sponsors. My name is Sean Bishop, and I'm one of the editors of the Wisconsin Poetry Series, alongside founding editor Ronald Wallace, whom I believe may be in the audience tonight, so throw up some emojis for Ron in the chat if you'd like. With the help of the University of Wisconsin Press, Ron Wallace created this series 36 years ago as of this fall, growing the project slowly from just one book a year at first to 5 books a year. And we'll be growing that number even more very soon. And we'll be making an announcement about that in January, we hope. To date, we're proud to have published nearly 80 collections of poetry, most of them by debut authors, and that number grows faster with each passing year. Tonight's reading features 5 brand new voices in our series: Carlina Duan, Christopher Nelson, Leigh Knowles, Diane Kerr, and Carlos Andres Gomez, who will be reading for us in that order. We received nearly 1,000 submissions to the Wisconsin Poetry Series for the year that these poets applied. And so these are the 5 authors who won in that 1,000 book contest. Our first reader tonight is Carlina Duan, who is a writer educator from Michigan and the author of the poetry collections I Wore My Blackest Hair from Little A, published in 2017. And most importantly to us, of course, Alien Miss, which was published this year by the University of Wisconsin Press. There it is. You can find links to buy all of our readers' books tonight in the chat. And you can find Carlina's poems over at Poetry Magazine, Narrative Magazine, Poets.org, The Rumpus, and many other publications. Carlina received her MFA in poetry from Vanderbilt University, and she currently teaches community-engaged writing at the University of Michigan, where she's a doctoral student in UM's joint program in English and education. Alien Miss is a book that has both haunted and comforted me during these past 2 years, when our country has at least begun to wake up a little bit to its prejudice and violence towards Asian Americans. The book is a brilliant and chilling exploration of some of that racist history, ranging 140 years from the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, through Maoism, through a celebration of Clara Elizabeth Chan Lee, the first Chinese American woman to register to vote, and through the speaker's own experience as both a child and as an adult in the US. But of course, what stuns me most about Alien Miss is not what it says, but how it says. The book is filled with poems so sonically and linguistically dense that we're forced to consider how prejudice lurks even in the smallest phonemes of our shared language. And the book is also filled with poems that repurpose questionnaire forms and Google searches, among other texts, to illustrate how we are guided and boxed in by institutional bias and by our own subjectivities. Alien Miss does all of this with a tenderness and a playfulness that somehow enhances rather than undermines the seriousness of its themes. We're so happy that Carlina could join us tonight. Please welcome Carlina Duan.
Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you so much for that beautiful introduction of Alien Miss. It's so wonderful to be here. Hello to everyone who is watching from home. I'm so honored to spend a December Thursday evening with you. And also thanks so much to Ron and to Connor and everyone who's a part of the Wisconsin Book Festival for the opportunity for this reading. I can't wait to hear my fellow poets read, and it's an honor to share space with all of you, Anna, Diane, Carlos, and Christopher. So I'm gonna start by reading a poem that is actually a joy poem. And I think Sean has done a really beautiful, eloquent job of describing Alien Miss, which is largely a book about intergenerational history and some of that history involving a lineage of joy. And so I'm going to start by reading a poem called Vision While Running on the Vanderbilt Indoor Track. There are 3 people you should know before I begin reading this poem. The first is Teresa Tung, who is an amazing Taiwanese folk singer, Clara Lee, who's the first Chinese American woman to vote in the United States, as Sean mentioned, and then also my Nai, who is my grandmother. So I'll begin with this poem. Vision while running on the Vanderbilt indoor track. 3 minutes in, and those I've dared to call God in my mind push me on Teresa Tung, Clara Lee, my nai-nai, clad in blue silk slippers, shouting, "Go, go," while my will sags into the folds of a wet tank top. Brown track, white shoelace, blue smooth love I had for the river I flew past on a train last spring, returning to a square room with somebody who wrapped gifts for me and left them in a pile on the wooden table, books about olive trees shying beneath shimmering sleeves of paper, but shh. Nai-Nai sits on the bridge of my nose, telling me to shut up. Wallowing in heartbreak won't serve you a mile, she snaps, and I'm sluggish, heavy, panting 1,000 hurried breaths, watching the basketball sail in lean arcs below the track, the clock flashing red pixels, the ceaseless dribble. When I think I can't survive, the next minute, the next hour, February with all my lonely and beads of sweat, women slip into their clouds and chop off their hair, let it hail over me, black stuff, the scent of licorice and steam. I'm running, carrying these women in my shoes on my back. They're hollering my name, cracking into me like oyster shells with wild tongues, clacking sets of teeth. I can't go on, I try to tell them, but they're playing pool in my mouth, saliva beads, and I swallow, tiny women in my stomach telling me they're the boss of me now. Go run, run the way they did all those years ago. Nai-Nai learning how to read by salvaging newsprint from the factory's lean bins, deciphering the curly characters, she, her, hers, mouthing the words for change. Running her way to night class after canning each aluminum tub of peaches. Clara Elizabeth Chan Lee running to the polling booth, her name laid fresh on a sheath of paper, run, gripping the ballot tight in her fists, darkening bubbles, tracing each letter's swoop and curl. I choose, I choose, I choose. Teresa Tung running to a microphone, her tongue flitting between Mandarin, Hokkien, Cantonese, English, high notes strung like lines of syrup across a room. Miwen wa ai ni o duo shen. Run into the moon or into the sun girls would swing into decades later, eating bagels with cream cheese at the car wash, Teresa's voice shrill and hopeful, discs blasted on loop. Run, the woman in me chant, enclosing me in earthbound duty till I'm whirring mid-flight, leaving behind one step, 1,000, run, I'm loved, I love, run, till I can't feel the ache in me anymore. And I'm not lonely, I'm not lonely. I'm stuffed to the seams with old laughter, throngs of it, a line of women in my chest, urging me to let it fly, blessing me to move, move, move. Thanks so much for listening to that first poem. So the second poem I'm going to read is from an earlier section in the book, and this is a section of Alien Miss poems. In the Alien Miss poems, I was specifically thinking about an intergenerational speaker, largely based off of my own experiences, but also part kind of historical reading and historical imagination. And so this particular poem references the Angel Island Immigration Station, which was essentially the Ellis Island of the East. I was thinking largely here about the Chinese Exclusion Acts and sort of the history and lineage of violence that language, specifically legal language, has had in kind of my own everyday world and embodiment. So this particular poem references language from the Star-Spangled Banner. It also references language from an 1885 broadside letter archived at the Library of Congress, which was addressed to the president around ill treatment of Chinese Americans at the time. So this second poem I'll read is called Alien Miss Consults Her Past. Alien Miss consults her past. On Angel Island, she finds a bolt of blue linen cloth, moles on the chest, boats, men who boarded them, bound for a golden country to pave, to stave off hunger, labor. What's an American dream but a debt, a price to pay? How to say, longing, longing, oh, say, can you see? Vowels opened, bare feet hitting the grass, lawn sprawls of land, touching foot to ground, foot to hardwood floor. Water, then more water. Slats of light against a lawn wall. Sang her own name to a room, holding a pool of water on the ton. Sang her own name to a tree, to another head, its river of hair matted on the pillow, barred from entry, barred from country, barred while carrying a chain link fence, lawful, feral, fearful, what's in the past is in the past is in the past. Quote, that these threats and intimidations and riotous bloody acts in this nation, which claims to be a leading nation in intelligence, morality, and culture, shock our sense of national pride. The past is in the future in a woman who strips down before crawling into a barracks lonely bed. Above her, the cloth hangs to dry, goosebumps on the skin. Practices saying the words out loud. By the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed, what so proudly we hailed, what so proudly, so, oh. So that's that second poem. Thank you so much for listening. I think I have time to just read one more tonight. So I'm going to experiment and read a poem that I actually don't read out loud very often. So thank you so much again for celebrating poetry together in this kind of communal reading. I'm so happy again to be here. This last poem that I'll read is called, Do You Have a Grammatically Correct Response to the Question? I was specifically thinking about how I could remix the kind of grammar textbook. And so you'll hear me as I read pause at various moments. And when I pause, you can kind of picture a blank line on the page, almost like a Mad Lib, as in a fill in the blank. So this is my last poem for this evening. It's called, Do You Have a Grammatically Correct Response to the Question? And remember the time I stood at the intersection carrying my black suit of hair, and the woman stopped in her shiny car, rolled down her window to scream something vulgar, something clinking inside her mouth, a word, a system of grammar flipped to fury, red, ripe, railing at me. For what? My body? My attention? Anger is often in response to a boundary crossed. What was that boundary? Where were my legs? Why did I stand there without a word, holding the straw in my ice-cubed drink as the liquid turned warm and illegible between these jaws? Slosh, slosh. The woman stopped in her shiny car. The woman stopped to scream, "You!" in her shiny car at me. Who is the subject of this sentence? Who is the object? What is the verb? Standard English grammar dictates the proper tense. Do I care about the proper? She spat at me. She said a bad word. A string of words demarcating my body, hit by grammar, hit by a field of letters, hid behind a lump in my throat while my body remained my body. My lungs pulled up the hot July air. My hair remained parted to the side as I clasped the straw, as I watched the tips of my feet, a body to be screamed at by a stranger. July, North American, a street. Which tense would you like to use to describe the incident above? The past, the future, I will eat leaves and pour vinaigrette slow and skinny. I will feed the low opal of my mouth. In times of distress, I will turn on the stove. Garlic will be fried in a river of yellow oil. I will eat my letters, crunchy and fat, angry and swollen, soft and slathered in old-fashioned oats. I will try to pull up the words. Hit me, she did. Hurt me, I am. Language, she did. The word, I am not. On a North American street, on a hot July day, a woman stopped her car where I waited at an intersection to tell me I was a. On a North American street, on a hot July day, a woman stopped her car where I waited at an intersection to scream the word. Later, I wilted leaves in a hot pan. Later, I fed the story back to my mouth. Later, the syntax was rewound in a reel set aside, and I composed a new body of Roman letters out of my body. I pulled up words from their waggling roots and raised them to touch the edges of a face, a page, to cure and hold and praise and wriggle and snap and sister and alive, amen, and alive, amen, then defy and talk back. Thank you all so much for listening and for being here. And thank you so much again to the Wisconsin Book Festival and to the University of Wisconsin Press. It's such a privilege to be here.
Thank you, Carlina. That was wonderful. And I'm so glad you read. Do you have a grammatically correct response for that's one of my favorites in the book for sure. Our next reader is Christopher Nelson, who's the author of Blood Aria, which was published by the University of Wisconsin Press this year. And he's also the author of 3 chapbooks, including Blue House, which was the recipient of a New American Poets Fellowship from the Poetry Society of America. Those are some beautiful chapbooks. If you've ever seen the series, you should check it out. He's the founder and editor of the journal Under a Warm Green Linden and Green Linden Press, which is a nonprofit publisher dedicated to poetic excellence and reforestation. Reading Blood Aria for the first time, I was reminded of an old writing mentor of mine who was obsessed in that uncomfortable, outdated Freudian way with the connection between Eros and Thanatos, with this connection between love and death, sex and violence. And I think writers are always using the language of sex to illustrate violence and the language of violence to signify sex. But to write about that connection, like really about it, rather than just to reiterate it or to use it as a clever evocative device is much, much harder to do and much more important to do. In Blood Aria, Christopher Nelson does that. He writes fearlessly about sexual assault, about homophobia and grief, among other topics. And he does so in a way that is not merely an act of witness, but also somehow a kind of spiritual practice. In sprawling poems that take time to get lost in themselves, that have complex syntax that unfolds along the line breaks, sort of like origami, Blood Aria is a book that refuses simple convictions or easy illustrations because, as Christopher writes in the poem Elegy for a River, quote, "It matters that art not be yet another bright escape hatch from the irreparable things we have done." Please welcome our next reader, Christopher Nelson.
Thank you, Sean, for that kind and thoughtful introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be able to share poems with you. Thanks to the Wisconsin Book Festival for bringing us all together. And thanks also to Ron Wallace, if you're in the audience, for all that you have done in making so many wonderful books part of the world. I'm going to read the title poem of my book, Blood Aria, and it's kind of a longer poem. It'll be the one poem I read tonight. And I should say that, as Sean described, the book is of violence, and there's some gun violence is the subject of the poem. So if that's a little much right now, I'll read for about 9 minutes. The poem has 2 epigraphs, And the first one is from the frequently asked questions section of the Bullet Blocker website. How do I use my bulletproof backpack? Hold the bag between yourself and the threat, using the straps as handles. Use it as a shield to provide cover for your upper torso, your vital organs. And then from Genesis, and the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel, thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? Blood Aria. So the story goes, the first human born is a murderer, moored, secret killing. And when the earth drinks the blood, the Lord hears screaming. Despite 3,000 teenagers inside, what the first responders hear is silence. When the rounds hit a body, they fragment, 4 bullets in one. Goodbye, lung. Goodbye, liver, heart, bladder. House of the soul in the Inuit myth, where raven pierces the first bladder to let out light, hence day. Then Father takes it away, hence night. In the documentary, the paramedic says that when the first body was carried from the school toward the ambulance, she was relieved, knowing she could help, could make something right. But then she saw what had become of the 6-year-old, barely held together anymore. There was a pause, long for television. 5 years after the massacre, she still can't tell the story. My mind fills in the details, like a marionette whose strings are cut. It's never answered why God was impressed by the firstling of the flock, but not the fruit of the field, the favor of the Father, the first source of envy. Such a male story, emphasis on act and consequence, duty before dignity, feelings that touch bathos, then retreat into minutia. In the live stream of the rampage, the surprising loudness of the shots makes end users on every continent flinch. What was once a girl is lifted, blood puddle, bright tile. Cain excited or terrified by the color inside Edenic kin. They always say it. We never thought it would happen here. I said it too. Tucson, Arizona, October 29, 2002. For 5 days, news vans are parked along the streets. I walk past before they go live. The reporter checks his hair in the reflection of the window. Kathy pops into my office. Lock your door. There's a shooter in the building. I wasn't afraid until I peeked into the hall, saw a black-clad SWAT team scooting along the wall, rifles held vertical, a strict formality that made the whole world seem shabby. It wasn't real until then, and then nothing was real. Let us go into the field, the first brother says. The killer writes a 20-page letter detailing how he's been wronged. Religious scholars justify God's bias, noting that Abel gave the best of his flock, but nowhere in the canon does it say that Cain gave the best of his field. The professor crawls beneath the desk and begs to remain alive, inside of time, bound by identity, bound by body, nourished by the unbelievably red rivers that comprise us, that flow and pulse and carry. Please, more oxygen. Please, I have a daughter. Her name is Sam. In one version of the story, Eve is raped by an archon, but we reject this, for it offers a way out. The mythic fundament is that inside each of us is Cain. The dude on Facebook I haven't seen since high school said, "The government's coming for all the guns." If only God was in people's homes, he waxes, this would never happen. And then it happens again. I am driving. The radio says 49 dead. It happens again. I'm at a party and the news interrupts and the music responds. Turn off the hope you had for me. Turn on the voice that cries again. I am walking and I see a helicopter circling and I know it's happening. Turn off the lights. Turn on the rain. The older brother puts his hand on the small of the younger's back and leads him to the ultimate unnamed thing. During the funeral service, we release 3 white doves. We had to obtain a special permit from the county. Had we been unable, our backup plan was balloons, until someone said, "This is not a celebration." The word drawn out as the tears turned on and our faces became masks of Greek tragedy. Some of us still go around that way, unable to right the frown. It's been 17 years. The corners of our eyes reaching down almost to jawline. "Can you hear them?" I'm asked in a dream as I pick up the shining casings. And for a moment I do. Like a sudden soundtrack, screams of joy and laughter in the empty playground. Each day I think 15, 20, 50 times. If the shooting begins now, what will I do? In the bathroom, copy room, lunchroom, parking lot, in the library with the 12-year-olds, in their favorite shirts and bangles, rounding the hall corner, hit, 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 as the smoke bombs ignite. In the documentary, the janitor asks rhetorically, "Does a day go by when I don't think of it?" Abel turns, surprised. Does an hour go by? One white dove flies, lands in a tree, and stays until we begin to fold up the chairs. Do 5 minutes go by without thinking of it? Cain, aching for father love, lifts a spike like a raven's beak. It can't always be light, the first story reminds. And when the world breaks, you look for yourself in the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. That was wonderful. Christopher didn't hold up his own book, so I'm going to do it for him. So Blood Aria is the book, and once again, you can click the link in the chat to buy any of our authors' books tonight. I will say that like so many of the books from this season of the series really do speak to each other in certain ways, which I think you may see with our next reader, who is Leigh Knowles, whose debut collection, Conditions of the Wounded, appeared from the University of Wisconsin Press this year. Knowles' work appears in Blackbird, Indiana Review, Memorious, the Missouri Review Online, Poetry Northwest, Rhino, Story South, and others. She's a recipient of the Illinois Arts Council Agency Award and has also received scholarships from the Appalachian Writers Workshop, the Bear Rivers Writers Workshop, and San Miguel Allende Writers Conference. She holds an MFA from she holds an MFA from Southern Illinois University Carbondale, and she currently teaches English in Trinidad and Tobago. Conditions of the Wounded is a book framed by the 1999 Columbine Massacre, but it is not a book about the Columbine Massacre, or at least not really. Rather, it's a book about the ugliness and difficulty of survival, a book about a youth colored by chronic illness, addiction, 12 steps, piss tests, and plasma donations, where a suburban house can be described as, quote, a chipped scab with a good yard. Conditions of the Wounded is at once a refusal to allow one's home and one's childhood to be defined by a single trauma, and an acknowledgement that they can't be understood otherwise. We see the before and the after, the bright scars crisscrossing Littleton, Colorado, but we also see a speaker who won't let herself merely be, quote, a girl from a town where the dead stay young. It's a sad and a beautiful book, and we're lucky to get to hear a little bit of it tonight. So please welcome Leigh Knowles.
Thank you so much, Sean. I wanted to echo everyone else's sentiment who's read tonight. And Christopher, Carlina, thank you so much for reading. It's great to hear your voices and see you all, even though it's virtually. So yes, I think listening to Christopher read, I was reminded again how our books are kind of in conversation with each other. So just to kind of start out the trajectory of what I have planned to read from Conditions of the Wounded, the ambition for this book isn't or was never to hark back into the echo chamber of school shootings and gun violence, but to write both in rebellion of tragedy and in blindness of its possibility at the same time. So I hope in reading some of the work, some of the Columbine poems tonight can be seen as an act of protest itself. And that being said, Sean's absolutely right. The poems are centered around a community that's traumatized by gun violence. And sadly, the last couple of months and years that I have read poems from this particular manuscript and book, I have begun an acknowledgement of the most recent school shooting. And so tonight I'm thinking particularly about the Oxford community in Michigan and Oxford High School. So tonight I'm going to start reading some of the Columbine poems in the book, and then I'm going to move on to something a little bit more hopeful. Burying the time capsule at dark not long after the Columbine High School shooting. Spring and snowmelt spread through the slush-thick meadows, tunneling through the upper river valleys. There was no climbing out of it. Instead of tending to ourselves in that loneliness, my sister and I gathered our once loved things into a pathetic heap to be buried. Keychains stolen from Phillips 66, homemade lanyards, plastic necklaces, mood rings. We left our house at night, which shed its light on wet ground. Then, dropping a shovel over the fence, we hauled ourselves over the chain link, separating the schoolyard from the back of our house, crawled into a cluster of alders and dug. It was a margarita mixer box we lowered down like a seed, measuring our steps from the trunk of an aspen, so years later we could reclaim what we buried. But in the brief April mist, in the warming night and bell-swung breeze, my sister and I are still children, hair ruffled and nail beds splotched with each clutch and sink. Our two shadows sunken and trowel-like between build beams of school light. Even then, I didn't know the state flower was the Columbine, laboring beneath the peaks, translucent skins purpling us all. From that day forward, we rattled inside while the sounds of the outer world went on. Somebody's engine revved way off, warm wind spraying from curtains, plastic bags caught in pockets of cottonwoods, bats nudged high up in the rafters of the garage. We never found it again. Over time, our strides grew long and the box decayed, dredged up and ransacked from the earth by kids like us, thinking they released some incredible anchor to our suffering. If I had known the days would splay and break, I would have cried mercy. If we were losing ourselves, getting by with the new truths of our small lives, which we in the world would meet each day, we didn't know. Our world asked for souls, and be paid with the weight of having lived. The next poem I'm going to read is called Aftermath. I have tried to say this other ways. We were damaged. Cold mountain mornings, broken branches trembled in our drowsy air. Sagebrush washed through the fence lines. The canal curved flat. Power lines dissected, chicory ripe ridges. Our plum tree swayed heavy in the wind. Outside the house, swollen bulbs in the ground, stunned, suddenly open, corrosive with lethargy. My eyes, sun-withered wicks, squinted behind half-drawn curtains. Hard to stay out of the dark, isn't it? What does it matter what held me or who? But the ghost of the lost and gone. Each day my life begins. Crab apples spatter the ravine. Towhees scream, and I've become so used to that sound. Another sharp heart in the yard's stark tune. This time it isn't the rest of the raptured earth I hear, but myself, yearning this way. Always seems what I wanted to be true about heartache isn't. There is no bullet-worthy clemency. It knows no ease. I can sense it, absence, its tunneling of the body, a grief I learned to live through by not remembering whole days. It gets easier, is what I mean. What a lie it'd be to say every school shooting no longer shakes me from dreams, awake and heaving, splashed in my own vomit. Takes all but dying to slip from my skin, to calm the beating between the ribs. The only world I knew, mountains. The blur of light and shadow from Evans, Quandary, ice-gutted glaciers letting go is not the same country I see leaning over these fences. Split pitch pine awash in June grass, lodge poles pulled to the ground like half-sunk tusks. But it's the closest I can get to a home anymore. I'm still living behind a meadow, studying the shape of snowcaps. Cone-heavy fir trees rock on the face of the creek. Needles split like hairpins in the ditchweed. Over and beyond, the mountains never move. They stay where they are and never move. Only weak haze drifts across them now, faint and thin. Violet streaks reach across frozen skies. Shouts fill the dugouts. Cleats in the fields clutch and run through mud, and past the chain link, the ranges spread on forever. Magenta wounds, the rage in us blistering. Flag half-mast at the high school. Just cottonwoods forever, then evergreens. Above tree line, bristlecones torque into themselves, petrified. Starts of wet flakes wheeled outward. End the drifting for miles down these hills. Send me down, spin me in all directions. This is one way of accepting the life I've inherited. Let the dead dream along the churning edges of earth. All the surprises ahead of me, I already know. All right, so I live in Trinidad and Tobago now, and in my rush and haste to leave the US, I forgot to bring my own book. So I would show you my book, but all I have are single pages, so maybe you can look online at the website for the Wisconsin Book Festival. Now I'm going to pivot over to the first poem in the book, and this is called The Bomb Shelter. In our backyard, a pipe rose through the ground like a periscope. No one followed us into that hollow, girded round in steel, bent like a horseshoe raised with us inside. Under the cool clay of the garden, our weight lay anchor. My sister and I felt the emptiness like a pulse. Water dripped down walls, and in the air, the scent of grass and grime. We warmed the dirt, only to step out holding on to nothing but each other, lost sight to the sun-skinned edges of sky. Even so, we dressed our dank stockade as though it was a sibling we weren't allowed to speak of, and that we kept it hidden, and that we crouched down as though root tips yanked at our hair. We shuffled down liters of water, cradling the jugs under our shirts like babies waiting to be born. Against the plastic against our bellies, a gift for the tilted world without us in it. There was a hole in the ceiling for air, an invitation, a far, damp drone. Groundwater seeped through spade-deep grooves. Hard to say why we locked each other inside, if only to corkscrew into our own echoes, if only to ready the dying light of bombs we couldn't visualize. One of us screamed up, a firmament of breath clinging to the voiceless bulb of dark. The other sang to still the girl beneath the green, the girl above ground, sounding as though she had seen the future and survived. Okay, so the last little poem I'm going to read is about a famous or well-known establishment in the Denver area. If you are not familiar with the establishment, Casa Bonita, I'm sure if you Google it, you'll hear about it from the show South Park. If not, I wrote this poem about it from my first communion. It's called First Communion After Party. At the center of a strip mall down Colfax, the pink facade of Casa Bonita rose 85 feet above the deserted lot. Big clouds rolled overhead, scudded east. It was the castle I needed to believe in, standing in my church clothes mid-afternoon as the faces of the red rocks miles out jutted forth from the earth like cocked carbines. The fake blue fountain sprayed into dry air, flecked my skin. Outside, the world was darkening, but inside the family restaurant, I watched two divers at the top of a fake cliff, arms raised above their heads before synchronizing themselves 30 feet into the water tanks below. They called it a lagoon, a deep, dark place. I wanted it to be real. I didn't know the difference. Plastic skulls glowed along walls, wooden signs displayed gunfights and puppet shows. My velvet shoes stomped over plastic underbrush. Past the arcades and Pirate Cave, I posed for a photo behind the rubber bars of a Western jail. My communion dress draped lace over the bar stool like tablecloth. My props, a bottle of rye whiskey hugged under my right arm like a doll, black cowboy hat pulled to the rims of my glasses, an old Colt 45 quiet on my left thigh like I had something to protect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. That was terrific. So Anna doesn't have her book, but I have her book. It's Conditions of the Wounded, and this is what it looks like. Really beautiful covers on the books this year. Thanks to the team at University of Wisconsin Press for that. Our penultimate poet this evening is Diane Kerr, whose second book, Perigee, was selected by guest judge Natasha Trethewey as winner of the 2020 Brittingham Prize in Poetry. Diane is the author of Butterfly, published by World Tech Communications in 2014, and a chapbook called One from Parallel Press in 2007. Her poems have appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review, appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review, Mississippi Review, Pearl, Poetry East, South Dakota Review, and Southern Indiana Review, among others. And she's been awarded fellowships to Rope Walk and Hedgebrook. Diane holds an MFA from the Warren Wilson Program for Writers, has taught writing at the University of Pittsburgh, and mentors poets through the Mad Women in the Attic creative writing program at Carlow University in Pittsburgh. Diane Kerr's book-length poem Perigee is, like all the collections we're celebrating tonight, an act of witness, of testimony. It recounts a life lived in silence, following the speaker's sexual assault during her childhood by her horse riding instructor. Perigee enacts a powerful end to that silence, evoking the Senate testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and the crimes of Roy Moore and Jerry Sandusky, among others, with stunning beauty and sincerity. But from a craft perspective, Perigee is also an exercise in minimalism. How much work can be done with just a few characters, a mother, a daughter, a riding instructor? How much imagery can be given in one book to the orbit of the moon? How can you hold a reader's attention? How can you keep things surprising in an 87-page poem with a palette that spare? Remarkably, Kerr makes it work by revealing new facets, new ways of seeing these stories and images with each subsequent iteration, thereby enacting the process of memory itself, the act of visiting and revisiting the past, the act of invention and recovery through which we all make sense of the world. Please welcome Diane Kerr.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sean, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to the University of Wisconsin Press and the festival and the library for organizing this reading. Thanks especially to Sean Bishop and Ron Wallace for publishing my book, and to Natasha Trethewey for honoring it with the Brittingham. Perigee is a poem memoir, a book-length sequence. And I think you've already been tipped off somewhat to the subject. It is about sexual abuse that I experienced when I was 13 years old. The context is the rural Midwest, Wisconsin, in fact, and mid-century of the last century. Because Perigee is a book-length sequence made up of poem segments which do not have titles, I'll just pause after each segment to let you know where one leaves off and the next one begins. And hopefully I'll remember to give you a finger signal when I'm about to read the last one. Perigee. Not a woods anyone would want to timber. New growth, scrubby. You'd have to really look for an oak big enough to take. Still, someone's hard at it. Chainsaw, whining, then the pause, the little silence after the completed slice, the crackling crash, the quiet thud. It was like that. I could still move, though I didn't know I could still move. Let's see. If I was 13, then it's our diamond anniversary. Yes, 2016 less 60, it was 1956, and you were 56. How I loved that you were born with the century. Afterward, it was always easy to know how old you are. Were. In the 90s, my breathing eased. Surely not, I said to myself. No, surely he's not still. Which also means you cannot tell, ever. Wouldn't that make it my secret, only mine? Time to tell, hardest of all substance, diamond, from the Greek adamas, diamond, meaning adamant, enduring. Early spring, April maybe, dusk. No, more than dusk, almost dark. A gang of neighbor kids, both of my brothers too, play by the embankment to the haymow. He's given all of us rides on his white donkeys, but now the donkeys are safely loaded into his decrepit horse trailer. We don't want the fun to end. The boys jump off the stone wall like grasshoppers, then wrestle on the damp ground. So early, the nights are still cold. Now it's getting colder. I'm thin, shivering. From behind, he puts his denim jacket around me, his arms under the jacket. Warm, his man's body solid and warm against me. His hands stroking my arms, folded across my small belly. He's talking, laughing, egging on the boys, whom we can barely see now. I'm wearing my first bra, a training bra, training my new breasts. Now, his hands move up under my t-shirt. A mistake, I think. He'll stop, be embarrassed when he realizes what he's doing. He'll stop, pull away. It's completely dark now, but it's the next second I need you to see. The one when I know it's not a mistake, when his fingers first touch the little nipples, that second and all that followed, when I do not make a noise or move or feel, when I disappear. He wasn't a Boston priest, nor a New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago, or Los Angeles one either. He wasn't a Boy Scout leader or coach, nor a father, grandfather, or uncle. And he wasn't a teacher, no, not even a riding teacher, unless you call watching a girl ride around a barnyard and fall off over and over teaching. Horse trader, drifter, no account, ne'er-do-well, loser. He was nothing, nobody. Then everything, everybody. After I lead the beloved into his box stall, after I lay one stirrup up over the seat and loosen the cinch, after I lift the bulky tool saddle and Mexican saddle blanket, hoist both of them onto the rack in the tack room, after I unbuckle the ornate bridle and slip the steel snaffle out of his velvet mouth, after I put on his halter, wipe down his burgundy withers and back, curry him all over, after I unplait, brush the long black mane and tail, after I check his water, his hay, give him the oats with molasses that he loves, for which he stamps and whinnies impatiently, after I go out and set the latch, but before I can walk 2 stalls down, before I can saddle up my mare, before I can put on my yellow leather cowgirl jacket with the fringed sleeves, my hat, my gloves, the red plaid wool scarf to protect my face from the wind, before I can slide open the heavy wooden door, mount, and ride away, he will get up from the bale of straw where he sits watching me, and it will begin. Afterward, the long ride home. Always it was deep winter, always dusk, always snowing, darkening blue cold, biting whatever wasn't covered. My eyes, the thin space between ankle and boot, glove and cuff. He knew I could not be late, knew they expected me at 6 for supper. I knew he would let me go by 5. Snow deep in the fields, slowing the little mare. So bitter cold, I rode bareback. Between my legs, warmth radiated up as though shame were seeping out, freezing onto the outside of me, turning to snow, always the snow, more than half a century later, still coming down. Forgot to give you the signal. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Diane. That was lovely. I know we have a lot of undergraduates in the audience tonight, and a lot of you I know are interested in sort of that intersection between memoir and poetry, and interested also in like writing longer poems, which isn't always possible in our workshops. And Diane's book Perigee is a really great example of both of those things. So I hope you'll check it out. That brings us to our final poet of the evening, Carlos Andres Gomez. whose debut full-length poetry collection Fractures was selected by Natasha Trethewey as winner of the 2020 Felix Pollock Prize in Poetry. Fractures subsequently won the 2021 Midwest Book Award for Poetry, the 2021 Independent Publisher Book Award Silver Medal, and the 2021 Georgia Author of the Year Award. So not too shabby. Gomez is a Colombian American poet from New York City, and his poems have been published in New England Review, Beloit Poetry Journal, the Yale Review, BuzzFeed Reader, and the anthology Chorus, a literary mixtape, among other places. He is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. And you can learn more about him at carloslive.com. Fractures is a book of tenderness, though maybe you wouldn't guess it from the title. So many poems here are full of love and care toward the speaker's wife and son, toward a stranger on the bus, toward the speaker's daughter as he struggles to braid her hair. But this isn't to say that Fractures is a misleading title, because in the best poems of the book, the author breaks a bone or two before he mends them. In one, Gomez roasts a racist Twitter troll only to imagine the troll's sad life, a CEO who misses his daughter or a bullied high school kid, and wish him in the poem's closing lines, quote, "A life that ever leaves you in the wake of its gentle and endless awe." In another poem, Gomez begins by lamenting that Mein Kampf has better Amazon reviews than 100 Years of Solitude. In fact, I didn't know before I read the poem, but it's just makes me shudder. Only to pivot into a quiet portrait of his sleeping daughter, and then pivot again to show a cop beating a homeless man in the street. The effect of poems like this is jarring, stunning. Gomez won't let us forget the awfulness of the world, but he also won't let us forget his love for it either. Please welcome Carlos Andres Gomez.
Before I say anything, I just want to just give it up for Sean Bishop, who's just giving the most beautiful, thoughtful, and generous introductions and celebrations of all of my fellow authors' incredible books. If you don't have Anna Knowles' book or Carlina Duan's book or Christopher Bocut's book or Diane Kerr's book, you should get them immediately. I'm so honored. Big thank you also to Ron Wallace and Dennis Lloyd and my editor Sheila and Jennifer, who did my cover, and the entire team at University of Wisconsin Press, and Connor Moran and everybody at the Wisconsin Book Festival. I'm so grateful for you all having us and lifting up our work, even in the strange world that we're in. So thank you all so much. This poem is about me being 15 and kind of losing and finding myself and losing myself again at an all ages dance party in Providence, Rhode Island. This is called Last Sundays at Bootleggers. My entire wardrobe was Canal Street original. Knockoff chic, adolescent sleek in my double XL blue and black bubble jacket. Yeah, I was inside the club, and what? Inside an oversized coat coated in Old Spice, coated in sweat and Old Spice, a kid eyeing 16, but not quite there. I wanted it all Chico. The latest Jordans in baby blue, maybe a wink from the pretty Boricua in social studies. And when Biggie's verse dropped in Only You, he was in that room and teaching us how to stay elevated from that third floor wasteland towering above India Point. So we sang, sour-throated and nostalgic, for times we hadn't yet lived in unison, like we wrote it, till our voices cracked and spilled over and between every rift. But in the throng of lost kids where I finally found a self I loved, it all came together, like we could remix any wreckage and make it into a stage to slay. So we swayed and grinded like our lives were a music video tribute, hip to hip. I used to be a social worker in Harlem and the Bronx many years ago. And This is inspired by that and also becoming a father. Father. 1. In the basement of the crack house I used to visit as an outreach worker. On 121st Street in Harlem, I was convinced he refused to travel north of 96. I wrote a letter to Joanna on her mission in Taiwan, detailed each irrefutable piece of evidence proving we are all, in fact, alone. Told her about the 9-year-old orphan forced to sell her body for 3 years before ending up just off Times Square, discarded in a dumpster. I told her about the eldest son who answered a burglar's call and was shot, paralyzed from the waist down. I asked her about drought and famine and endless civil wars. What lessons does his book refuse? 2. When her heart rate dropped by half in less than a minute, the population of our cramped hospital room tripling in a handful of seconds, I grasped for anything that would keep me upright. At first, the wall, cool and steady, demanding my body ascend beyond what seemed possible. Then, nothing. No one. I stood in the waiting room to the OR, waiting to be called in to find out if my child had survived. I spent each second trying to pull tiny shoe coverings over my 2 large feet. I confessed every wrong of my life to an empty, overlit room of steel and sterile instruments that all reflected back distorted versions of myself. I fumbled for any prayer I could remember, hoping that I had all along been mistaken about the hollow blackness of the infinite sky. I never wanted so badly to have been wrong about anything in my life. And then a disembodied voice called out, seemingly only to me, a tiny growl at first that blossomed into a wail dwarfing any thought my mind could possibly hold, any faith I'd ever been so foolish to claim. This is dedicated to the 16 and 17-year-old boys that I used to work with on Rikers Island, the largest jail population-wise in the world, the big jail in New York City. And it's called Mourning Rikers Island. Mourning Rikers Island. Physics and light pierce the hollow stench of the forgotten gymnasium, stripped naked of clocks. All the adolescent boys stop, offer their grief to each other like water, glancing out the only window they all share. A single ray unfolds its warmth across the dusty belly of the flooded parquet. And here's the miracle. The sun frees everyone to sing. Thank you all again. I just have one more poem. Again, please support and buy everyone's book. Get Anna Knowles' book, get Carlina Duan's book, get Christopher Bokut's book, get Diane Kerr's book. Again, my book is Fractures. Thank you, University of Wisconsin Press. And big thank you again to Connor Moran and Sean Bishop and the Wisconsin Book Festival. This has been really special and wonderful, and hopefully we can do this in person down the road. Thank you all so much again. I don't know if anyone else feels like this. I was telling my fellow authors that I'm like exiled in the basement while I have my wonderful in-laws here, and my daughter is quarantined for 2 weeks, and my son is sick but tested negative for COVID. I'm kind of like moment by moment right now. Right now is so overwhelming and absurd, and it's been that way for almost 2 years as a parent to 2 small kids, and just being a human in the world. I wrote this poem in a really, really difficult time when I was very depressed, and it was kind of like a poem I wrote. I gave my assignment to write out kind of the gratitudes that keep me going. And it's a poem I turn to a lot, but particularly right now. So I want to end with this poem, and it's called Praise, and it goes like this. Praise. Because my grandmother's final days lasted 23 years. And so we'd rush each time. Say goodbye and goodbye. Te quiero mucho, abuelita. Te adoro. Because my mother's truest mother is grief, who taught her the slack-jawed abandon of joy. Because my daughter strung together a 4-syllable word this afternoon. Because I say I love you so much to my wife mid-fight. And we chuckle sometimes between barbs, like we forgot which characters we were supposed to play, because I was given a best friend for all of 6 years. And we handwrote letters each week in bright ink, dreamed of whose hair would give way first, because the dust gave me a reprieve from the storm on the way home from daycare today. Because the rain is a stubborn guard when I am most tired. And grace refuses the chariot, also known as that rickety stroller that has somehow not yet quit, because Brent metamorphoses those ticking minutes everyone else loses sleep over, shows up an hour early, or makes me wait while I reread the menu I've had memorized for a decade, because we pretend we don't know what we'll order, ask each other, then get the chicken pad thai every damn time, because my sister and brother were once small enough to make a home of my curled arm. Because I loathed their arrival until that moment on the 7th floor of Mount Sinai, because there are no half siblings. Because my body begins to fail a little more each morning in minute and quiet increments, like gradual, gorgeous rust. Because I courted death too long, but now dream of my retirement porch. Because my son scalped at 76 seconds old, the 3 weeks he barely slept for more than 15 minutes, the lunges that shaped my quads and calmed his sobbing just long enough, because I have wanted to be a father as long as I have feared its weight, because I exhale knowing I cannot fail what I cannot leave, because no one I know has grown more in 3 decades than my father. Because right now, the oven is performing its miracles. Fall is teasing us with its fickle weather. My daughter is coloring in vibrant looping scrawls that look like cartoon fireworks, or the curls wreathing the large eyes she's borrowed from her mother. And finally, I'm home.
Thank you, Carlos. That was incredible. And thank you to all of our poets tonight. Carlina Dwan, Christopher Nelson, Leigh Knowles, Diane Kerr, Carlos Andres Gomez. If you liked what you heard tonight, again, please click those links to buy their books. Once again, thank you to Connor Moran, to the Wisconsin Book Festival, to the Madison Public Library, the Madison Public Library Foundation, and all our sponsors, as well as to my fellow series editor and founder of the Wisconsin Poetry Series, Ronald Wallace, to University of Press Director Dennis Lloyd, to Casey and Caitlin and Lisa and Allie and everyone else at UW Press, and of course to everyone in the audience who has helped to read submissions to the Wisconsin Poetry Series or who has submitted to the Wisconsin Poetry Series. We're grateful to every one of you. Thanks for logging on. good night. Go get that booster if you haven't already, and we hope to see you in the real world very soon. Thank you. Good night, everybody.